If I haven't met you before, I'm Joslyn. I'm a devoted student of Trudy's and a teacher here at Insight LA. I'm joining you from southern Vermont, actually, the land of the Abenaki people, where I've been living for the past couple of years. I have such fond memories of going very diligently to Sunday sitting group when I lived in Los Angeles in person. Was the highlight of the week for me. So I'm always so delighted to be able to join this group and sub for Trudy as needed. And I know you were with my dear friend and beloved co-teacher Thomas Davis last week. We usually like to teach this together, but this time we're taking turns. So happy Sunday. And as I mentioned previously, Trudy is so sorry she couldn't be here with you today, and we'll be back with you next week. Welcome to any new people who are joining us for the first time, and welcome back to the regulars who I feel such a fondness for as well. So new people and familiar faces, welcome, welcome. Delighted to be here with you. So we'll follow the usual typical format. I'll do some introductions, and then we'll have some time to sit together, practice formal meditation that'll offer some light guidance. And then we'll have a very short bio break. And then we'll get into a teaching. I'll offer a teaching, some reflections on the Dharma. And then we'll have some time for sharing, for group discussion. And then also we'll take another bio break at the end of our formal allotted time together. And then if folks want to stay and chat in breakout rooms, we'll have time for that after the closing. And I'd like to give a thank you to Ashley, who will be moderating for us today. It's such a gift. And if you have any questions or any technical challenges or any difficulties throughout our time together, please message Ashley, and she'll attend to those needs as best she can. So we can get started here if that sounds pretty much okay to everyone. I'd like to have some consent for what we'll be doing today. Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate the nods and the thumbs up. So my idea for our time together today would be to look at the teaching around wise effort, are basically how we use energy in our practice. It's one of my favorite teachings. It's something that I feel that I reflect on regularly in my life. Maybe you can all relate to this interesting part of being human, where we have these ebbs and flows in our energy. Some days we have a lot of energy, some days we have low energy, even different times throughout the day, energy fluctuates and it changes like everything else. It's one of the things that we can't seem to keep constant. And the Buddha has some wisdom around this, around how we work with our patterns of energy. And I thought I'd share that with you because, like I said, it's a thing. How we manage our energy can really inform how much suffering or joy we have in our lives. It can often come down to how we're managing our energy. So that's what we'll be getting into today together. And so I'd like to start actually before we move into our formal meditation practice with a story around this teaching. It may be very familiar to some of you. It comes from a sutta called the Sona Sutta, and Sona is the name of the monastic. So this was a teaching that the Buddha offered to Sona. And so we'll just start with a little story time, and then I'll sort of use this teaching as our meditation instructions in the formal practice. Sona, S-O-N-A, was a devoted disciple of the Buddhas, a monastic, and he was on a long retreat out in the wilderness, probably, living in a cave and having that ascetic life that we can all relate to, right? Um, but we can imagine this even for ourselves in our daily lives. I was very, very inspired for the practice, which many of you are, because you're taking this time on a Sunday to practice, to show up here. So you're also all devoted, dedicated practitioners, even though we're mostly living in some cozy home furnishings, sleeping in beds and kitchens and bathrooms and all the good stuff. But Sona was really, really trying to wake up. Really was doing everything he could, following all of the Buddha's instructions so diligently. Like many of us, getting up early in the morning to practice, or making time in our day when it's not convenient to bring ourselves to the practice. A lot of wholesome desire. But he was getting exhausted, like really burnt out, which I'm sure some of us have also encountered, of like, oh my God, again, I have to get up this early and I have to sit here this super uncomfortable chair or on the floor, my body hurts. Like, why is this not working? Right? They promised me all of these good things if I meditated. I'm supposed to feel calm and peaceful and float a few inches off the ground and have all the patience in the world for my parents or children or spouse. Like, it's just not working. Sona felt very similarly. He's like, it's just not working. I'm so frustrated. So he had this great idea where he was like, I'm just going to give it up. I'm going to stop meditating. Like, screw this. I'm over it. And he had a family where he had some wealth, like he had some pretty wealthy benefactors. So he decided he was going to give up meditation, stop being a monastic, go home to his comfy house, and he was just going to support the Buddhist teaching. He was going to make donations, right? This is a great idea. I thought this was genius. We could do this too. Like, I'm done meditating. Thank you, Trudy, for everything you've taught me, but it just hasn't quite worked out. But I'll make you this donation. It's not a bad idea. I can still support the teachings. I just don't have to practice anymore. That'll work out. So the Buddha, being the Buddha, heard in his own mind that Sona had this thought, that Sona was ready to give it all up. And so the Buddha appeared magically before Sona. So you can imagine, you decide you're not going to meditate anymore. You're just going to make a nice donation to Inside LA. And then Trudy shows up right in your living room. Okay. She's just standing there like, what were you thinking? No. Right. So the Buddha appears before Sona, who probably feels a little bit ashamed, as we might as well, if Trudy just shows up at our door, having heard this thought, that we're just done with meditation. So the Buddha shows up and he turns to Sona and says, I know that you come from this wealthy family, and probably in your family, you learned how to play a musical instrument, right? Probably, had some teachers that were brought in that taught him how to play what at that time in India was a classical stringed instrument called a veena. But we can think of it as like a guitar, kind of banjo, stringed instrument. He says, did you learn to play that when you were growing up? And Sona's like, yeah, of course. And so the Buddha uses this image as an example for Sona and says, well, when you tuned the instrument, the guitar strings, when they were too tight, did it make a nice sound? And Sona's like, no, obviously not. The Buddha's like, how about when they were too loose? Did then it make a nice sound? Sona's like, no. Where's he going with this, right? And so I'm going to read for you the words actually in the translation. So the Buddha says, in the same way, Sona, when energy is too forceful, it leads to restlessness. And when energy is too slack, it leads to laziness. So Sona, you should apply yourself to energy in the same way. finding a balance and learning the pattern of this situation. So he's saying when it's too tight, when there's too much tension on the strings, it leads to restlessness. And when it's too slack, when the strings are too loose, it leads to laziness. So in the same way, we are tuning our meditation practice. We are tuning our mind and body in the same way we would tune an instrument. And it's up to us to use our mindfulness to determine what the energy is like in the body and the mind that day, and then practice accordingly. So we're always tuning our instrument and then finding that balance and working with the energy appropriately. So those are our instructions that I'm going to break down a little bit more in the guided meditation so we can play around with that tuning process directly in our practice. Okay. So if you'd like to make your way into a posture that would be most comfortable for you for meditation today, and even here in the posture, we can begin tuning our instruments. So what I find for myself, if I'm a little bit sleepy, I want to be a little bit more upright. Even standing sometimes can be good when there's a lot of sleepiness. And if there's a lot of tension, if you're feeling a little bit uptight and restless, then we want to make ourselves really comfortable. So even right now, as you sort of set yourself up for meditation, you might just want to check in, sort of check the internal and physical weather to see if you need to make yourself a little bit more comfortable because the body's kind of fidgety, or if the body is feeling really sleepy, maybe making yourself a little bit uncomfortable. So that kind of wakes you up and arouses the energy. So I'll give you a few moments to play with that. And it's the same thing with the eyes. So people often ask if I should meditate with the eyes open or the eyes closed. And if you find that you're sleepy, keeping the eyes open can help you stay awake. And if you're feeling quite restless and easily distracted, then closing the eyes will help you settle. And as you settle yourself into your posture here, it can sometimes be nice to just begin any formal meditation practice by taking a few breaths and breathing a little bit more deeply than you would normally. So maybe inhaling and filling up the belly and the chest. And then exhaling, letting everything go with a sigh. Maybe one or two more breaths like this, inhaling, filling the belly, filling the chest, squeezing in a little bit more air. Exhaling, letting that all go. And then one more breath, taking in as much air as you can. Exhaling, letting it all go and lowering the shoulders a little bit as you exhale. And now allowing the breath to just be normal, easy breathing. Letting the natural rhythm of your breath take over. And as we settle into our practice here, slightly investigating with a gentle curiosity what the energy is like today in this heart, in this mind, in this body. And instead of judging it or complaining or trying to fix it, instead just finding a skillful way to work with whatever is here. So if there's some sleepiness or laziness, lethargy, we can open the eyes and sit a little bit more upright. We can also bring our attention a little bit more to the inhale, feeling that freshness of air as it comes into the body. We can also work with sound. Trying to catch just the beginning of a sound. Bringing some curiosity to if the sound is close or far away. Sometimes brighten the mind. Bring that curiosity to the soundscape around us. Noticing all the different textures of sound. Bird song, cars, sounds of other humans, animals. And just experimenting for yourself if that brings some brightness and clarity to the mind to have an activity. Being an investigator of soundscape. Arousing the energy. And if you're noticing that there's too much energy, if there's some restlessness, some agitation in the body or in the mind, too much thinking, can't quite settle in, it can be skillful to bring into balance. We can focus on the exhale if we're using breath as an anchor. So with each exhale, just letting go of this restless mind or this agitated body, noticing the natural relaxation that can occur with a deep exhale. We can also anchor our attention in physical sensations in the body where there is some comfort and ease. Maybe just simply in the hands or the feet or the belly. And just noticing where there is a lack of stress or agitation in the body, where there's already some ease and calm, and just focusing our attention to that. Skillfully distracting ourselves from the agitation or the restlessness. So continuing on our own to practice in this way. If we need to tighten our instrument, if things are feeling too slack, bringing some uprightness to the posture, opening the eyes a little bit, bringing our attention to the inhale or to sound. Always we can tighten up a bit. And if we're too tight, if we need to loosen the strings a little bit, can bring more attention to the exhale, or finding places in the body where there's already relaxation and welcoming those sensations, resting our attention there, allowing the rest of the instrument to follow that cue, loosening up as needed. Continuing to lightly investigate the quality of energy in the body, in the mind, not with an agenda to fix it or change it or improve it, more with some gentleness and kindness of how to bring it into balance, how to support the arousing of energy if things feel too slack and loose, and how to tranquilize the energy a little bit, calm things down if there's too much restlessness and tension. Having this type of flexibility in our practice to work with the energy as it naturally arises. Calming things down by relaxing the posture a little bit, getting a little bit more comfortable, exhaling fully, closing the eyes, brightening things by opening the eyes, sitting a little bit more upright, focusing more on the inhale, using the tools that we have as needed. And maybe noticing how the energy has shifted or changed just during this practice. Maybe there's more calm or settling or tranquility than when we started. Or maybe there's an increase in energy, more aliveness, clarity, brightness in the mind. Just seeing how inconstant energy is, how it ebbs and flows, arouses and calms. And now we'll begin to transition out of this formal practice here. I invite you, if your eyes have been closed, to just flutter them open and look around the space. Maybe noticing the shapes and colors, noticing the windows and doors, and just letting your eyes fall wherever they may fall. Maybe inviting some gentle movement of rolling the shoulders or stretching the neck. Just allowing the body to move however it might like to move. Wow. Thank you so much for your practice. We'll take a short break now, just a 5-minute break to get some water, use the restroom, stand up for a moment. And we'll come back at 10 to, I guess 10 to noon for on the Pacific time zone and 10 to 3 here on the East Coast. So I'll see you in a moment. Friends, starting to make your way back if you're have wandered far away. And coming back to our circle of rectangles here, our Zoom community of Dharma friends. So I wanted to share this teaching with you from the Sona Sutta because I do feel like it's so relatable. Um, in that we have this tendency, I find personally, to really judge our energy. If we're having a lot of energy, maybe we think that's great and we want it to always be like that. We want to always feel like we have so much energy, and I think a lot in our society that's really celebrated, to be busy, to do so much in a day, you know. Um, and personally, I'm not a morning person. Anyone who's ever spent any time with me knows that I'm not a morning person at all. It takes me a while to wake up. I like this expression that I'm still sort of thick with sleep for a few hours after I'm technically awake. There's a sleepiness or dream space that really lingers in my system. And I've been practicing yoga and meditation for a long time, for almost 20 years. And I really struggled with this aspect of myself because it seems like yoga and meditation are things that happen at dawn. Like they happen really early in the morning. And I would struggle so much to get up early to practice, especially on retreat. I really felt like 5:30 a.m., that first sit was where the real yogis were, the real yogis. They were sitting at, before the birds. They're up before the birds, up before dawn, before daybreak. That's where the magic happens. And so I would force myself to do this and struggle with my natural energy, just my natural rhythm. And I did this for way too long, honestly, for years, created a lot of unnecessary suffering to try to be one of these daybreak yogis. And then when I really just gave it up out of frustration, just, kind of like Sona was just like, I'm done. I give up. I can't do this anymore. And I let myself really just follow my natural rhythms. I found that my best sits, best sit being the one where I had a natural amount of concentration, where I just had a good amount of energy for practice, where I could just practice with ease, was really, after most yogis went to bed at around 9 p.m. The hall on retreat would sort of empty out by about 9:30. And then I could just practice, till around 11 p.m., 11:30, sometimes even till midnight with just so much ease. And I was like, wow, where there was confusion, there was a judgment that somehow I was supposed to be different. And so when I really began to pay attention to what my natural rhythm was during the day into the evening, then things really opened up for me in my practice. And I became a late night yogi. And that, was just what this body, mind, heart, that's just its affinity. So I think this is just something to pay attention to when we can get past our preconceived notions or our judgments or our beliefs about what the right amount of energy is at the right times of day. We can stop fighting with it. We can see that there is some wisdom that's just here in the body that knows when it wants to do these things. And obviously, a meditation retreat is particular conditions, and it can be hard in our daily lives to sort of allow these natural energies to unfurl because the rest of the world is on a schedule that we have to abide by to a certain extent. So it can be tricky. I mean, if you have a job where you have a 9 a.m. meeting that's the most important meeting of the day, then we have to work with that. We maybe have to find ways to support our energy if we don't naturally have a lot of energy at that time of day. But we can use our mindfulness practice, this natural sort of curiosity, this quality of mindfulness that's just doing data collection, to figure out how to skillfully support the energies to work within a system that maybe isn't set up to support our natural energies. So the Buddha talked a lot about energy, about effort. So the word in Pali is virya, and it gets translated either way as energy or effort. And virya is sort of where our word vitality, virility, these types of words that we have, vigor in the English language, they come from the Sanskrit Pali root of virya. So I'll use the word energy and effort sort of interchangeably as I go through this teaching. But this term, energy or effort, it comes up on a lot of the Buddha's lists. The Buddha liked to make lists. It's helpful in an oral tradition to have lists. It helps people remember the teachings. And so we have a teaching of the 7 factors of awakening, and energy finds itself on that list. We have a teaching called the 5 spiritual faculties or powers, and energy is also on that list. We have the 8-fold path of practice. Wise effort finds itself on that list. So it came up a lot, I think, because it's a big deal, right? If the Buddha's talking about it a lot, finds itself on a lot of lists, it's probably pretty important. And what's interesting about the lists and about the places where the Buddha would talk about energy is it often found itself sort of snuggled in with the teachings around mindfulness and concentration. So for instance, in the 8-fold path, 3 of the path factors are wise effort, wise mindfulness, wise concentration. In the teaching of the awakening factors, energy finds itself between investigation and joy, which leads to concentration and tranquility. And then in the paramis, which is a teaching of the perfections, energy finds itself there too, snuggled between wisdom and patience. So this teaching often folded itself in with the instructions around how we practice meditation, really sort of the technical teachings. In the 5 spiritual faculties, it's also there next to mindfulness and concentration and wisdom. And so the way that we skillfully work with energy translates directly to our meditation technique. And so I kind of tried to demonstrate that a little bit in the guided meditation, how we can sort of tune in to what the energy is like and then support it to do the work that we're doing in our meditation practice. And so the classical teaching on wise effort or the skillful use of energy, it's a 4-fold teaching. So there's 4 factors of how we work with energy. And this is sort of technical in terms of how we do this in our meditation practice, but I find this teaching to be really appropriate to our daily life practice as well, of how to skillfully work with our energy or to wisely understand effort. So there's an abbreviation for this teaching that I really like. And if you know me, you know that I am a dog lover. So the abbreviation is PAWS, like you have paws, PAWS. I've always wanted paws, so I really like this teaching. And this is like a little helpful way to remember the 4 wise efforts. So the first wise effort is to prevent, that's the P for the pause, to prevent unwholesome states of mind. or we could say like unwholesome uses of our energy. Or just if it's not working, like the things that maybe we're doing in our lives that are, we could say, a waste of energy or not a good use of our energy, they're depleting us. They just don't feel skillful. So the Buddha says to prevent that, right? So if you notice that something that you're doing in your daily life is sucking a lot of your energy, it's just eating away at your energy, the Buddha's pretty clear of like, stop doing that. Like, just don't do that. Prevent that from happening. Do what you can in your life or in your practice to stop that. It's pretty clear. It's a pretty firm boundary, right? And this is one of the biggest teachings about energy, actually, is that you're going to need to have firm boundaries around your energy and how you use it. That's sort of the underlying key point as we go through the 4 wise efforts that I'll keep coming back to, is conserving and balancing your energy is going to require firm boundaries. So in terms of our practice, when we're sitting down to meditate and all of a sudden you remember something that's really important, right? How do we prevent that from happening in the future, right? Because that starts taking our energy. You may notice your mind sort of keeps coming back to it, right? Your mind's like, oh, this thing, I'm supposed to remember to do it. Oh my God, I can't believe I forgot. Oh my God, right? And all of a sudden we've lost our anchor. We're no longer paying attention to our breath. We're maybe going down a rabbit hole of, why am I so forgetful? I always forget. Oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And now we're, sort of in this downward spiral of self-criticism and judgment. So how do we prevent that from happening in the future? Well, because that's the P in the pause, right? Now we're going to be preventing these things. What I find, honestly, for me, if it's in the first 5 minutes of my practice, I just do it. Like, I'm not going to keep fighting with myself. Often when I sit down to practice, I have a little Post-it note and a pen really close by. And if it's in the first 5 minutes of practice, I make a note, I write it down. Like, I'm not going to keep fighting with myself. Because sometimes when we sit down to practice and we start to relax and things start to settle, our mind is sort of open and all of a sudden we remember things. It's just natural. It's just a natural way that the energy is working in the system, where now you sit down and relax and all of a sudden you remember all the things that you forgot. It doesn't have to be a big deal. It's okay. You can write it down. You can get that to-do list out of the way in the first 5 minutes of your practice. After that, I tend to have a little bit of a firm stance with myself, because now, like, I'm into my practice and I'm not going to sort of allow that. And that this is just what works for me. I encourage you to see what works for you. And so I tell myself, if it is really important, then I'm going to remember at the end of practice. I trust myself to remember. And if I don't, then I don't. And I don't make a big deal out of it. But that's what works for me. That's how I sort of work with this P of the pause. The A is to abandon the unwholesome states once they have arisen. So we try to prevent them as best as we can. And then once they're already there, we do our best to abandon them. So that's sort of what I was talking about with, if it's after the 5 minutes, I sort of have this hard line with myself where I'm going to abandon my to-do list tendencies. This stream of thought that wants to remind me of all of the things, like we had an opportunity for that. And now I'm just going to push that away. So we can skillfully redirect our attention in our formal practice. I take a little bit more interest in my anchor. I sort of recommit myself to practice, or I switch anchors to something that might be a little bit more interesting. If my breath is sort of hypnotizing me and, I'm kind of getting a little bit sluggish, so I'm getting a lot of sort of dreamy mind states. Well, now I'm going to open my eyes and work with sound, right? Something that'll sort of pull me back to what I'm actually supposed to be doing here, which is meditating and not planning my life. It can be tricky. Sometimes I forget that I'm not here on the cushion to plan my life, right? I think you can relate to this. In our daily lives, this can be where we get a little bit strict in our boundaries of like, for instance, if we have a friend that's maybe an old friend and we feel a lot of loyalty to this friendship, but every time we see this person, we're drained, maybe we need to rethink this friendship. Maybe we need to have firmer boundaries about how often we see this person. Maybe just, a little birthday lunch, but I don't need to see them every week or something like that because they really take a lot of my energy and I don't get a lot out of the friendship anymore. Maybe we need to abandon certain relationships in our life or just reframe them because they're taking a lot of energy. Maybe we need to rethink how often we use social media because we're finding that it takes a lot of our energy and we don't feel good after. Maybe we need to have firmer boundaries around that use. It can be great sometimes, it can be great here and there. But if we're finding we're really getting drawn into it and it's sucking a lot of our energy, the Buddha's pretty clear. Abandon the things that are depleting your energy, that are unwholesome. They're unwholesome because they're taking so much energy and they don't feel good. So that's the A in the pause. So these first two, the P and the A, are working with the unwholesome mind states, or the things that really deplete us, that take our energy, that leave us drained, that we don't feel good about, but we sort of have this habit. It's really just the momentum of a habit that is keeping this alive. And that's the main power of mindfulness, is it is the breaker of habits, right? It sort of comes in, this sort of sword of mindfulness, and cuts down these habits that are no longer serving us, that are happening below the level of mindfulness, outside of our awareness, that we're sort of being puppeted by. So that's the P and the A, that we can prevent and we can abandon. Now, for the good news, the W is where we welcome the good energy. So I was trying to direct this a little bit in our meditation practice, like where we can bring attention to where things are going well, where there is calm in the body if we're having too much energy. If the mind feels really restless and agitated, we can look to the body to be like, where is there calm? Where is there settling? And we can welcome that. We can bring our attention there and sort of allow that energy to nourish us, to bring us back into balance. Where are the friendships and the relationships that we leave and we feel like we're in a good mood and we feel happy, we feel enthusiastic, we have vitality? We welcome those friendships. We encourage those. What are the Instagram accounts that just bring you joy? For instance, there's one account that I absolutely love, which is Kevin, who's a Bernese mountain dog. And all it is his owner throwing things to him that he cannot catch. This dog cannot catch to save his life. And so that Instagram account for me brings me a lot of energy. I find myself giggling. It's completely ridiculous, So that's like a skillful use for me of Instagram, right? Like what are the things in your life? Maybe it's being outside, having a cup of coffee outside, with bird song in the morning. It brings you really good energy. The Buddha's like, welcome that. Maybe do that before you sit down to meditate because it arouses energy in the system and brings you joy. So looking for the places in our life where things are going well, and not shying away from that, encouraging that. So that's the W, to welcome good energy when it's there, when it's just naturally occurring. And the S is to sustain, right? So nothing lasts forever, unfortunately. But we can amplify something that is already occurring. So we can do this by bringing more attention to it, right? We can also do this by just letting it, just like the S could also be a savoring. So when we really notice that we're having a meditative experience that's quite joyful, delightful, everything has just come together perfectly, we can savor those conditions. Just really let ourselves be nourished by them. Like I was saying, if you have a friend that, you really brings you joy and you love seeing them, like going into that experience, knowing I'm going to savor this. Like this is a place where my energy really gets filled up. So I'm welcoming the experience, encouraging it to arise. And then once I'm in it, I'm just really resting in it, steeping like a tea bag, just really soaking into that, savoring it, not taking it for granted, really allowing ourselves to enjoy that tasty food that is this experience. So those are our 4 wise efforts. Like I said, they're really useful in our meditation practice. Like technically, we can really work with them every time we sit down to meditate, every time we practice formally. And they can also be really useful in our daily lives of beginning to pay attention to where our energy is depleted and where we are being nourished. And then having firm boundaries around that experience, those experiences going forward, like using our present moment experience to help us make decisions in the future about what we do. Okay, is that pretty clear? Okay. So there's a quote that I read recently that I just absolutely love, and I want to share with you that sort of sums this up in a really nice way. It's from a teacher named Ajahn Sucitto, and he's a monastic teacher in the Thai forest tradition. He's a British person who practiced for a long time in Thailand and now lives in England and runs several monasteries there. And he says, none of us has too much or too little energy. All that we suffer from is imbalance and ignorance about it. I think that just sort of sums up that pause, that wise effort teaching really succinctly. The energy just is what it is. We have a lot of judgments, we have a lot of perceptions and beliefs around how the energy should be, but it just is what it is in any given moment. And it's up to us to work with it skillfully, to use it, to use our understanding of the energy to inform how we proceed. So like I sort of shared with you in my story about practice, I really thought I had too little energy. I thought I had to be a morning person. I had to get up at dawn to meditate. And I was in ignorance about that. Right? My energy is what it is in the mornings. And I just have to let myself wake up with however much time it takes for me to wake up. And just respond skillfully, stay up a little bit later in the evenings, because that's when my energy is most suitable for practice. Right? I just wanted to share that with you. And then I also just want to share a little bit about working with chronic pain and working with illness, because that's really where the firm boundaries around energy come in and are very important. Yes, I can write his name here. So it's Ajahn Sucitto. And everything that Ajahn Sucitto writes is freely available on the internet because he's a monastic. So there's a wonderful thing that I discovered recently from, I'm going to pull it up here. It's by Christina Miserandino. And it's a blog post. So that's the name of the author, Christine Miserandino, and the blog is But You Don't Look Sick. And so this is a woman that suffers from lupus, chronic illness, where there's always a lot of fatigue and just a lot of other things happening in the body. And there's a lot of sort of autoimmune diseases and things like that, chronic pain that people suffer with, where we have to be really mindful about how we exert energy. And so she has a theory called the spoons theory that I want to share with you. I'm going to read a little bit of this post to you. So it's another little story time. I have a little story here. So she was having dinner with a friend of hers who was asking a lot of questions about her illness and how it felt and what it was like, to be sick. And she decided that she was going to try to explain this to her friend by using spoons, because they were at a restaurant, they were at a diner. So she actually collected spoons from a bunch of different tables and handed her friend 12 spoons. So her friend was very confused, about where she was going with this. And so she handed her these spoons and she said, "Here you go. Now you have lupus." Okay. She has 12 spoons in her hand. And she asked her to count her spoons. And she said, "Why do I have to count the spoons?" And so Christine explained that when you're healthy, you expect to have a never-ending supply of spoons. But when you are sick, you need to know exactly how many spoons you have. Okay, and she was immediately disappointed. She's like, "Why only 12?" Right? So Christine explains that you have to be conscious of how many spoons you have. You can't drop them because you can never forget that you have this chronic illness. And these are the spoons that you have to work with. So her friend thought this was going to be fine, that I guess 12 spoons would be enough. And then Christine explained to her the tasks of the day, rattling off the chores she would have to do, getting dressed, making breakfast, getting to work. And her friend immediately, thought this would be plenty of spoons for getting through the tasks at hand. So Christine explains, first, when you wake up in the morning, you have to crack open your eyes and realize that you're probably already late because you didn't sleep well the night before. You have to crawl out of bed and then make yourself something to eat before you can do anything else because you have to take your medicine. And if you don't take your medicine, you might as well give up all your spoons for today and tomorrow. So Christine quickly took away one spoon just with opening her eyes. She hadn't even gotten dressed yet. Showering was going to cost her another spoon. Washing her hair would be even another spoon, because reaching high or low that early in the morning could actually cost an additional spoon. Getting dressed was another spoon. Christine stopped and broke down every task to her friend about how just getting dressed isn't as simple as you think. You cannot simply just throw clothes on when you're sick. If my hands hurt, I can't wear anything with buttons. If I have bruises that day, I need to wear long sleeves. If I have a fever, I need a sweater to stay warm. If my hair is falling out, I need to spend more time to look presentable. So it might take a healthy person 5 minutes, could take me 2 hours to do all of this. Christine says, I think my friend was starting to understand because she hadn't even gotten to work and she was already left with 6 spoons. I then explained to her that she needed to choose the rest of her day wisely, since when your spoons are gone, they're gone. You can't borrow against tomorrow's spoons, because just think about how hard tomorrow will be with less spoons. I also needed to explain that a person who is sick always lives with the looming thought that tomorrow may be the day that a cold comes, or an infection, or any number of things that could be dangerous. So you do not want to run low on spoons, because you never know when you will truly need them. I didn't want to depress her, but I needed to be realistic. As we went through the rest of the day, she slowly learned that skipping lunch would cost a spoon, as well as standing on the train or even typing at the computer too long. She was forced to make choices and think about things differently. Hypothetically, she had to choose not to run errands just so she could eat dinner that night. And when we got to the end of the pretend day, I summarized that to eat dinner, she only had one spoon left. That was going to be tricky, because if she cooked, she wouldn't have enough energy to clean. And if she went out for dinner, she might be too tired to drive home. Then I also explained that I didn't even bother to add into this game that maybe she was going to be so nauseous that cooking was probably out of the question. So we decided she would just make soup, and that at 7 p.m. she could have the rest of the night with maybe less than a spoon, because we couldn't do anything fun or clean the apartment because we were out of spoons. So that's another way that we can think about energy, right? Oftentimes we maybe take for granted that we're healthy and that we can really maybe push or pull on the energy a little bit. We can sort of take on more than might be in our best interest, knowing that we'll be able to make it up somewhere along the way. But often it's the people living with chronic illness or chronic pain or things like that that actually deeply understand this teaching about energy and how we have to say no to certain things to conserve our energy, how we can say yes to other things, but there might be a cost, and kind of always having this extra super duper mindfulness around monitoring the energy. There's a lot that we can learn from people living with chronic illness about this. But sometimes people who are in these healthy bodies, we actually maybe take for granted this whole teaching around energy and how to skillfully use our effort. That the Buddha is actually pointing us to. The Buddha is actually almost, I don't want to say like putting us in bodies with chronic pain or illness, because that's not what we're doing. We can't possibly imagine what it's like, but developing and cultivating that type of fine-tuned attention towards our energy, no matter what type of body we're living in, to be incredibly skillful, to have these types of firm boundaries around when to conserve energy, when to expend energy, what is a skillful use of energy, what is serving our energy, and what is just draining our energy unnecessarily. And the Buddha is asking us to be as mindful as a person living in a body with chronic illness about this. So I just wanted to bring that in, maybe for some of you who are living in this type of situation, and have already sort of navigated this wisdom on your own, so that you really are teachers in this for those of us in healthy bodies that maybe haven't taken this so seriously. That's my offering to you for today.